today I'm not going to say too much. I'm just going to hand it over to Christoph for the first presentation. Just a few words before we get started. Today, of course, we will have first a session on what I call methodology and entrepreneurial design. So it's going to be Christoph first presenting, followed by Dimo. And I haven't seen the presentations. I've read Dimo's paper related to this presentation, and they're more in relating and engaging with the idea of how you can conduct empirical design science research and what are the criteria for validation, etc. And then after the break, we have empirical studies of entrepreneurial design, examples of researching entrepreneurial design, as I mentioned before. As I mentioned yesterday. So it's going to be Kathy Eisenhardt presenting, and I think Sirkka Jarvenpaa is going to be presenting as well.
And today we would like to kick off this session today by talking about how to evaluate design science and entrepreneurship. And this is really work in progress, and we've been thinking about some guiding principles which could be helpful in evaluating design science and entrepreneurship. We can kind of distinguish three approaches to entrepreneurship. So in entrepreneurship as science is kind of the mainstream paradigm in entrepreneurship currently, and then we're asking typical questions like why, how, what, who, some things like that. So I've brought an example question here, which is, why is personal initiative related to entrepreneurial performance? The ultimate value for evaluating entrepreneurship as science is whether the claims that we make are true. The knowledge that we are generating in entrepreneurship as science from a Bunge perspective is explanatory knowledge. This is what Henrik has been referring to also by descriptive knowledge. And this is kind of the cause-effect logic. So for us, entrepreneurship as design science is not tackling why or how questions, but actually how to questions. So an example question would be how to design a personal initiative training. And I've chosen this question here because this has been the question for a fantastic design science study, which has been recently published in Science, because it's evaluated essentially according to its usefulness. The type of knowledge is also a bit different. We are not developing explanatory knowledge here, but design knowledge, which is prescriptive knowledge instead of descriptive knowledge. Some talk about, Everett talks about teleological knowledge. So we're talking about some kind of means to achieve an end, so desired outcome. According to Bunge, this is also a scientific approach because it also uses the scientific method in which we pose a question against the body of design knowledge and then use some kind of methods which we all agreed upon. So that's kind of how he views it. Now, how is this different from practice? Now, entrepreneurship as practice also shares the value of usefulness, but it's different in that the knowledge that practice is generating is a bit different. So Bunge describes this as idiosyncratic knowledge. Now, how are the three fields related? Entrepreneurship as design science draws on the explanatory knowledge, and it provides some kind of new cognitive understanding problems to this entrepreneurship as design science. And it contributes to practice by sharing design knowledge, so guiding actions of entrepreneurs and entrepreneurship educators. And in turn, it receives a wonderful gift, which is practical problems which design scientists can wrestle with.
So what I want to do, and there would be links, I hope they'll be obvious with some of the work that was presented yesterday and some of the things that we've seen today from Christoph and Jan so far. What I'm interested in is, I'm interested in ground clearing. At least my approach is when I try to work on new areas, build new things, I like to clear the ground to make sure that it's a stable foundation to build things. And this comes from the fact that entrepreneurship is a very unique in the sense that people have come into entrepreneurship from all kinds of different areas. So they could come from economics, psychology, sociology, anthropology, if you wish, and and other sciences. And they bring different concepts, and these concepts have a lot of baggage with them because they're embedded in the way they're used in the particular language of the originating discipline. And if you've ever played Lego, play with Lego, when you open the box with someone's played before you, you reach and you want to get pieces that you want to work with. And when you get a piece, you realize that there's lots of other pieces attached to the pieces that you want. So one of the things you do is you shake off all these other pieces and you isolate the pieces you want, and you want to build from there. And one of the interesting things about actions is that what we do is subject to different descriptions. And an action is intentional only under some descriptions and not others. So for instance, if I describe as the person is searching for a ticket ending in 48, that's an intentional action. If I describe the person as winning the lottery, that's not an intentional action because the description of the action comes outside of the action space of the person. And what often happens, and this is where a lot of discussions have become kind of sidetracked, is when we seek this direct grasp of opportunities, it often means that we lose sight of the action space of the people who are on the ground and trying to do these things. And if we take this as a tension, do we want to explain action? And that means losing sight of the outcomes, not worry about what the outcomes are. We want to explain, why do people do the things that they do? Or do we want to explain why, given the things that were done, why these things ended up being successful or failing? These are two different things. Well, where I want to focus with this paper, and a lot of my work has been focused on that, it just becomes now explicit, is I want to focus on the action space. So my goal here is to make entrepreneurial action, the action of the people, intelligible. And that means that I cannot be interested in what happens down the line, whether these things succeed or not, because that involves different causal explanations. So to build things up, I want to build on basically 5 premises, which I think are very, very intuitive as to not require justification. So one, entrepreneurship involves a person. That should be clear. And of course, what is also clear is that not everyone is entrepreneur, and not everyone, and an entrepreneur is not an entrepreneur all the time. So right now, even if I'm running a venture right now, I'm a researcher talking to colleagues, and in an hour I'll be a parent, not necessarily doing my entrepreneurial thing. A person is an entrepreneur not by virtue of who he or she is, but by virtue of what he or she does. So that much is clear as well. However, an activity is entrepreneurial not by virtue of its performativity, whether, I could be pitching, and that could be an entrepreneurial pitch, or that could be a managerial pitch, or that could be a different pitch. I could be pitching. So what makes it entrepreneurial is the meaning of what happens. And now when it comes to meaning comes from what a person is trying to do. So we're talking about this intended future state of affairs. Now let's reserve that word opportunity for now. And it's something that a person can articulate as a motive for what they're trying to do. So if you ask someone, what are you doing? If I'm able to give you an explanation, that's my motif. That's the intentional description of the action, an answer to the question, what are you doing now? And of course, what I just did is a loop from person to action to meaning and back to person. So we can see how we're operating here in a loop. Now, if you ask an entrepreneur, what are you doing right now? They could say, I'm talking to a customer, I'm developing a product, I'm designing a business model, I'm launching a new venture. And these are all through descriptions of the actions of the entrepreneur, because they're done at slightly different level of abstraction. And the point here, and this again comes from work in this space, what is known as an accordion effect. An accordion effect is when I do a task that is more complex in nature, that requires a sequence of steps, there's one thing that I'm doing now, but there's really something broader that I am intending. So this is hence the idea of the accordion. And when we apply this to the entrepreneurial setting, we can see a new venture development as an accordion. So there's this idea of a new venture, but of course that's broken down into some milestones, and each of those milestones can be broken down into specific steps. And I use here the term theory of change. It comes from social policy and evaluation, policy evaluation, which is basically this idea that whatever you're trying to do, when you're trying to achieve an impact, you need to have a sense of the way in which you go about achieving that impact. So I've just borrowed that term from that particular literature. And this gives us right now to making that distinction between idea and opportunity that there's been so much arguments about. So venture idea, that's simply content. That's some stuff, future state of affairs. So we can use the term venture concept here, but it's a thing that doesn't do anything. We can talk about opportunity when that content is combined with a particular psychological mode, someone's intention. And because that intention is complex, we need to combine that with theory of change as well. So opportunity becomes this combination of venture concept, an individual who brings, whose intention that is, and intention is always someone's intention, and the theory of change. So that means without an idea, we can't have an opportunity. Without an individual, we can't have an opportunity. Without a theory of change, there's no opportunity. It's just a desire, which could be about anything. It could be a simple fantasizing. Here we bring the scholar in. When the scholar comes in and wants to study the entrepreneur, as a scholar, I can try and engage directly with the future state of affairs or try to study what the entrepreneur does.
The first study is a study that's called Organizing Form, Innovation, and Performance, and it's with Rob Bremner. And we just got accepted at Organization Science in this paper, so we're pretty excited about it. You can go to the next slide, Henrik. Okay, what are the key points of this paper? The research question is, as you can see, which is how does organizing form influence innovation, performance in nascent markets? The setting is the civilian drone industry. We're looking at two firms that you can think of as talking pigs. One of them is DJI, which is a Chinese firm and became probably the first Chinese firm to lead the world in innovation. The second firm is a venture here in the States called 3DR. 3DR is a talking pig because it is a venture, so it's a profit-making firm, but it actually uses a community as its innovation. What this paper does is look at three innovations, both from a problem-finding and a problem-solving point of view. The first innovation is a dominant design. The second innovation is a product market fit, and the third is a better product market fit, if you will. There are a couple of insights. The community was particularly good when the problem was ambiguous, like what's the dominant design? We didn't even know we had a problem. And we know from things like Wikipedia that the community is very good at modular design and at certain problems. By contrast, the community, or the firm rather, is very good at uncertain problems, finding them and resolving them, and when those problems are complex so that you can't modularize the solution. The second story is called, if you go to the next slide, Henrik, Measure Twice, Cut Once, Scaling Novel Business Models. This paper is under review. The research question here is, how do entrepreneurs design a scalable business model? The setting is online fashion, and we're looking at three different business models: a retail business model, a rental business model, and a new marketplace. And we're looking at three firms, a high-low pair in each of those business models. And so what the key insights of this paper are, and if you go to the next slide, Henrik, the key insight is that the high-performing firms, of which there's one in each pair, the high-performing firms slowly design a simple and profitable core transaction, and they purposefully delay growth. So the second part of this story is around understanding what this person did in terms of slowly designing a simple, profitable core transaction, using both experimentation as well as trial and error, as well as thinking through the problem. So a combination of strategies and delaying. Then once having the profitable core transaction, then proceeded to raise more money, balanced between growth and profit, built the core capability around artificial intelligence, and accelerated the scaling. And the story repeats across the three pairs, whether the business model is retail, which is what this model was, rental, you rent the clothes and look good for a day, or it's marketplace. You look in your closet and put your old clothes online and somebody buys them. So regardless of the business model, it was always the case that slowly designing a simple, profitable core transaction and delaying growth was more effective than just accelerating growth, for example, with what was termed growth hacks, like lots of email marketing. and then later balancing that growth and building a capability. The third paper is called Mavericks and Diplomats, Strategy in Nascent Markets Within Institutional Fields, and this is an R&R at Org Science. And the motivating question of this is how do ventures effectively form strategy in nascent markets within institutional fields? And here what we were interested in was thinking about that a lot of the most important problems in society, whether it's healthcare, education, climate change, defense, are in fact problems that involve institutional fields that are largely being driven by a non-commercial logic. And so we thought there was an interesting puzzle because on the one hand, we know a lot about entrepreneurship in commercial markets and understanding how you form new strategies in nascent markets. And we also know something in institutional theory about institutional entrepreneurship and how that's important to use rhetoric and political action and social movements to engage in change in institutional fields. What we found was that there were actually two paths, that two ways you could succeed. Perhaps there are more, but certainly we found two. The Maverick path and the Diplomat path. Each path begins with a vision about what is our stance relative to the field. So just to step back, both firms start with the vision of we want to democratize education. We want to give everybody access in the world to elite university faculty for free. So it was a very social entrepreneurship initial vision was around bringing elite education to around the world. So that was the premise. Each of them, however, had a different vision about what their role was relative to the higher education field. Maverick intended to disrupt. We are going to replace many of these universities, and in 50 years, there are only going to be 10-year universities, and one of them is going to be us. Diplomat, on the other hand, had the point of view of universities are important institutions, and we're going to support them in this new social entrepreneurship role. So one mission was disrupt, one was align. So just to wrap up, there are really three ideas here. Superior design of complex novel products, the tortoise wins, and equifinal processes. You asked me for the design principles. I think one of the design principles is you don't always have to be fast. That there are times that you want to slow down and get it right. I think another design principle is to think in terms of the problem-solving strategy and problem finding, not just learning. And to the third point was really a third point, which is respect that in certain times there are actually multiple ways to be effective. Okay, so those are the three design principles.
It's really trying to focus on the technology development aspects that particularly have been missing in digital entrepreneurship literature in my field, and hopefully that focus has relevance to this community. And from the IS perspective, when we look at the entrepreneurship literature, we see a lot of focus on the entrepreneurial activity and again, how to deal with this uncertainty. And the information systems community has tried to provide a complementary perspective, particularly looking at the digital artifacts, a lot about the attributes, how they are creating a much less bounded environment. So much talk about this boundaryless. And then rather than focus on the entrepreneurial action, really looking at these kind of what's called the objective actor independent factors. So in this theory paper, and again, this is still work in progress. So not yet submitted anywhere. We are trying to be bringing these two tracks together. So our research question is again about these digital resources, but not just looking at the attributes of the digital resources and how they create scale effects, but really taking those attributes and what is it that the entrepreneurs do with them. So really looking at the resources in use. So kind of bringing that, agency perspective along with these digital artifacts. And with the view that, again, need to be, whether we call it the balancing or blending. And of course, these are not equally important at any particular time. But think about the growth, the revenue, and the identity. So our backdrop is the resourcing theory. And so from the resourcing perspective, we get the schema, kind of the vision, the cognitive actions that I will speak about, and then of course, the action that has been driven by the schema, creates new resources and shapes the schema. So what we are really adding is trying to bring the technology development actions to the game. Really, the story is that we are trying with these mechanisms to, bring, bring this the entrepreneurial ends and the technology development approaches, and arguing that particularly as we think about the software ventures, it's not just about the artifacts, but really how they are produced.
You're talking about digital resourcing a lot, and I'm just wondering in what ways are different from resourcing generally?
So with digital resources, they tend to be much less of a cost to undo a commitment, for example. So that would be one example. And this kind of means that resourcing that is all about these actions haven't paid attention to attributes, but in digital resourcing, we do need to bring the attributes because they allow particularly these ampliative cycles to go much faster and much broader than what we would expect, for example, businesses with physical assets. In the previous presentation, we certainly heard about its growth and its profitability, and kind of adding, well, it's also identity. And it's not easy to manage these three things simultaneously, particularly with digital assets where, again, you have very open space, and particularly like communities can take you simultaneously to a lot of different, in different directions.